So welcome everyone. I want to introduce the Reverend Canon Alyssa Newton. She's the vicar at St. Columbus Episcopal Church in Kent, Washington, and the Canon for Congregational Development in the Diocese of Olympia. Alyssa is a member of the steering team for the College for Congregational Development, as well as founding trainer of that program and director of the Olympia College for Congregational Development. Alyssa has worked as a development consultant with churches and dioceses across the US and in Canada, and helped to launch several sites at the college for congregational development, as well as leading St. Columbus through an exciting time of revitalization and growth. Alyssa lives in Des Moines, Washington, with her husband, Andrew. They have 2 elementary school age children, a black lab, 2 guinea pigs, and 6 chickens.
6 chickens. They're COVID chickens. We got them. We were part of that whole trend of how everybody got chickens because we had nothing else to do during COVID. But
so thank you for saying yes to this invitation, and your presence here today is a blessing to all of us. Thank you. In this online session, Alyssa will lead us in a conversation about the unique challenges and opportunities that come to congregational leaders in times of anxiety and crisis. We will learn a model that can help us frame up what is happening in ourselves and in our organizational systems, as well as discern where the one ends and the other begins. So welcome, Alyssa.
Thank you. It's really good to be with you. It's one of the few gifts of this time is that we get to interact with people across distances that we might not have before. What we're going to talk about today is self-differentiated leadership, which is it's a concept that comes out of family systems theory, but we're particularly talking about it in terms of the anxiety that is present in our systems right now. So I'm going to start by telling you a story, and it's a story about me, and it's a story that's kind of clergy specific, but it is, I think, those of you who are not clergy will find it relevant in 2 ways, hopefully. One, you might also feel some of the things that I describe, and I would want you to know that if you have clergy, they also, these are things they are feeling and experiencing. So, but I'm going to start by talking about when I became a parent. When I became a mom, a lot of people had advice for me. They told me, a lot of people said to me, this is going to be the hardest thing you ever do, being a mom. And I can tell you they were right. Being a mother has been one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, one of the most challenging things that I've ever done. And also, the other thing I heard a lot from people as preparing for parenthood was that motherhood will be the most joyful thing, the most wonderful thing you ever do. And they were right about that too. I think my girls are 9 and 11 now, and it is one of the deepest joys of my life to be their mom. But there was a thing no one told me about being a mom. Nobody said to me, you will be really annoyed most of the time. Like, no one said, children are super annoying. And like on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being not annoyed at all and 10 being like you're pulling your own hair out annoyed, you will spend the rest of your life somewhere above a 3. Because kids are so different from adults. And I feel like I was so ready to work hard and I was so ready to be joyful, but I did not have the skills I needed to manage the sort of low level annoyance of little people who were always in my space and always needing something that was specific to them. Now, maybe not everyone has that experience. It has occurred to me that maybe not everyone is annoyed by their children. But no one got me ready for that. So I had to get ready for it and deal with it and figure it out. It was not glamorous, and it was a skill set I needed and didn't have. I feel like becoming a priest, a similar thing happened to me. as I was getting ready for priesthood, and this is something that I was doing about the same time I was getting ready for motherhood, a lot of people told me being a priest is going to be the hardest thing you do. I would say motherhood tops it, but being a priest is deeply challenging in lots of ways. And people also told me that this work, this vocation is one of the most joyful things you could ever experience. It will bring you deep gladness. And that has also been true for me. Getting to be with people at these thin spaces in their lives, getting to steward community is what gets me up in the morning. But nobody told me, it's not annoyance, no one told me that you will spend the rest of your life anxious if you become a priest, that you will never feel stable, that there will always be something, some low level to high level anxiety that you're managing or dealing with or trying to sleep through for your whole career. And so that took me by surprise. My first winter as a priest, I wasn't sleeping. I would wake up and think about people and things and, stuff someone had said on Sunday in the middle of the night. And I'm not a naturally anxious person. I didn't know how to deal with anxiety. And after a couple months of this, I thought, you know what? I think it's the job. I think this is a part of the job that no one prepared me for. I don't know. I started talking to other priests, and because no one talks about it either. I think that people think that if you're in church life, whether a lay leader or a clergy person, you're just supposed to trust God. And that's not anxious at all, right? If you're good at it, if you're a good Christian. And so I started talking to other priests, and what I found is that this was something that was going on for everybody. I would talk to, retired priests who were doing supply at tiny places, tiny rural congregations of 11 people, and they were anxious. And I would talk to deans of cathedrals that had huge endowments and never had to worry, it seemed to me, about money, and they were anxious. And then a few months ago, a global pandemic hit. And suddenly the regular levels of anxiety that are existing all the time in our churches, right? Because churches are systems where we bring all kinds of stuff into our churches with us, right? Church is a safe space for so many things, and leaders and clergy hold those things for people. And suddenly all that anxiety just ratcheted way, way up, right? Who's felt anxious about church in the last 8 months? Just wave at me if your screen is on. If you're not waving, there's something wrong. It's not reasonable to not be anxious at this point in time. So what we're going to talk about is how anxiety works, because anxiety in our systems, which everyone in this Zoom room is a leader in their system, anxiety is it's not good or bad. Actually, we're socialized to think of anxiety as a horrible thing, but actually, anxiety is energy. It can be used to propel us toward good things or toward bad things. Very few changes, either personally or systemically, happen without anxiety present, right? Think about voting this year, right? We're like hoping, actually this is demonstrable strategy, I think, on both sides to stoke anxiety to get someone to vote in a particular way, to leverage the energy that is present in our anxious systems toward a particular outcome, right? So what I want to talk about today, what we're going to look at, we're going to talk a little bit about how anxiety works in our systems, how it can be a force for positive change, or it can also become like a chronic illness, right? Like when our body's immune systems over-respond to an illness or a virus, and it becomes dangerous. And then we're going to look at a model for understanding how, as leaders, we can manage our own anxiety against our system's anxiety to make choices and decisions that help move our churches forward into positive positive new places. That's where we're headed. And also now you all know that I think my kids are annoying. Don't tell them. I'm going to tell them later when they grow up and have their own children. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Any questions before we move forward into what we're going to talk about today? Remember, right now you could say it out loud if you have a question, and you can always throw them in the chat. All right. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and start talking. These are just pages of from the manual that we use in the College for Congregational Development. So I want to look at this definition of a self-differentiated leader right here with Ed Friedman. I'm gonna, let's see, where's my, let's see it. Anyways, so definition of a self-differentiated leader. Someone who is less likely to become lost in the anxious emotional processes swirling about, who can separate while still remaining connected, and therefore can remain a modifying, non-anxious, and sometimes challenging presence, who can manage his or her own reactivity of others and therefore be able to take stands at the risk of displeasing. It is not as though some leaders can do this and some cannot. No one does this easily, and most leaders, I have learned, can improve their capacity. I'm just curious, and you can throw in a chat. It's kind of hard for me to look at the chat, but I can see it. Parenthood is grandparents' revenge. Yeah, it is. What in this definition stands out for you as you think about your leadership, either as something that's challenging or interesting? You can throw it in the chat. What words popped out for you when I read that definition? There's also only 20 of us, so you can also unmute and say out loud if you wanted to. Okay, risk of being displeasing, reactivity or non-reactivity, challenging, less anxious, non-anxious, risk. Yeah, these are all words that are scary words, interesting words. Yeah, I think reactivity and non-reactivity are really important to think about. Being able to respond instead of react is one of the leadership skills that is really important when your system is highly anxious. The other part of this that always hits me is the last the last line. No one does this easily, and most leaders, I have learned, can improve their capacity. We all, as leaders, have the capacity to get better at self-differentiation. Yeah, Trevor, I agree with you, especially in different cultural contexts. Trevor said that sometimes if you are non-anxious, people think you do not care. There are cultures where displaying emotion lets people know you care, right? There are also cultures where withholding emotion is a way to let people know you care. Where I am, in my context in the Pacific Northwest, there's lots of people, our heritage is Norwegian and Finnish. Those are cultures that use indirect communication, and so they, when people use emotion, it is experienced as unsafe often. But there are other cultures, like in Italy, has a dominant culture that prefers this, where if you don't show emotion, you seem to be holding back, right? So non-anxious doesn't necessarily mean no emotion, I would say. And it's as much about behaviors as it is about feelings. So we'll get more into that in a minute. So I'm going to skip this part and talk a little bit about the role of the leader in emotional fields. Anxiety is something that in most systems often floats around. And when I talk about systems, I'm just talking about thinking about your church as an organism. Your congregation, your families work this way too. Oftentimes in in a family, there will be a problem person. I fulfill that role in my family of origin. My family of origin is evangelical, and I became Episcopalian. So you can tell I'm the problem child. But systems theory would say that my family needs an Episcopalian. That if I stopped being that, someone else would do it. Because our systems, they express anxiety, systemic anxiety, often through individual people. This is true in our churches as well. I remember before I was ordained, I served as junior warden at the church that I attended. And there was a person on our vestry that was just always, she was the person who always said, but that's not how it's always been. I don't know if anyone has a person that does that on your leadership, but it was really annoying. We were trying to do all these new, lovely, wonderful things. And this one person was always like, we can't do that because that's not the way we've always done it. And we finally got her off of vestry. And it was this joyful moment where like, now we can do whatever we want because we won't have this person always telling us we can't do it. But as soon as she left, what do you think happened? Someone else started saying we can't do it because that's the way it's always, we've never done it that way before. That's the way it's always been. There was actually the systemic need for that human being. So this is the systems approach that we're taking. What I want you to notice is this section here, which is about what our job is as leaders, right here. So when the system is in crisis, leadership, and I mean clergy or lay, leadership can bring calm, right? When the system is bewildered, it is often the role of the leader to bring focus. When a system is stagnant, the leader can bring challenge. And when new situations arise that need new responses, the leader can bring change. What I want you to notice about all of those is that leaders are doing something that is different than what the rest of the system is doing. Do you see that? The role of the leader is to behave differently, to move against the flow of the system. So in an anxious system, the job of the leader is to bring calm. That means the leader behaves differently than the entire system. That's where we get the term self-differentiation, right? That there's need to differentiate yourself as a leader from whatever is happening in your system because your role is different. Your role is to some degree to take a step back and notice what's happening and then make some intentional choices about what to do. So when this pandemic first started, my church is, we're, I would say at this point about medium sized. So we have about our average Sunday attendance before the pandemic was right around 90. And we're about 30% of our Sunday morning attendance is people under the age of 16. So we have a lot of children and youth in our congregation, and we're about 25% people of color, mostly asylum seekers and immigrants or refugees from either South Sudan or Congo. And when, that's just like an overview, when the pandemic happened, there was a lot of different responses. It was chaos. Right, my people who are African immigrants are largely in healthcare, and so they were having a really particular experience. They work in nursing homes and do medical stuff. And our older people, went home. There was chaos everywhere, and it was the job of myself and our leadership to not panic, but to start to make choices. Even choices that we knew not everyone would like, right? So one of the first things we did was we started live streaming. We picked Facebook, and immediately dealt with a wave of elderly folks who didn't like Facebook, which is weird because most older people really love Facebook. But and figuring out how to help them connect and so forth. As it's gone on and things have gotten stagnant, it's been the job of leadership to say, okay, what can we do to re-enliven what's happening with our worship, what's happening with how we stay connected to each other, how we stay church together, and so forth and so on. So yes, you can't push a string. Yeah, so there's this job to stay a little bit separate, and it's hard to do. I want to show you the model that that we use at the college, and I'll tell you what the college, well, and so can Victor can tell you what the college is as well. But this is a way of looking at the task of leadership when it comes to working with your system and its anxiety. So back to here. All right. A model is just a picture of theory that helps us understand it better. It's like a lens. All right. Like my glasses that do a particular thing. I have to be careful. My glasses are broken because I sat on them in a sleeping bag last week. So this is our model for looking at self-differentiated leadership. There's 3 tasks, and leaders are doing all of them to different degrees and at different times. The first one is staying connected. Oh, I just highlighted way more than I wanted. I wanted to highlight that. There we go. Staying connected. It is the job of leaders to be emotionally present to their people, to resist the impulse to cut yourself off physically and emotionally, and to be able to be present and listen to the people and the system as a whole. Some of us do this in our sleep. Others of us, especially if you have been through trauma as a leader, or if you've been hurt by anxiety in your system, or you just have a naturally self-defensive, stance toward the world, it can be a challenge to stay connected. It can feel a lot safer to disconnect from your system when it's anxious or when you are anxious, right? So one response to anxiety, like a reactive response, can be to step back, cut off, and distance. What this model says is that the job of the leader is to resist that impulse and to step in and be present emotionally in authentic ways to your system. The other part, which I already highlighted on accident, setting direction. That is to be able to take a clear position that creates movement. You are all looking right now, I'm just listening to how you checked in. You're making decisions about how to set direction on regathering, right? When do you go back in the building? When do you, how do you figure out how to set up your space for that? What do you do about people that will not come back no matter how many masks you wear and how many windows you open, right? At some point, someone makes a call on this stuff, right? That is setting direction. My staff, I don't have a large staff. We're not a large church. There's 4 of us, and we are evenly split on whether on our levels of anxiety around pandemic. Half my staff would like to go home and stay there forever, and the other half of us would love to be back in the space right now. And so as the vicar, I get to be the person who makes the calls on that. I get to set direction on that. What we did was we have lots of outdoor space also, so we've been meeting outdoors since July. Not all of our people feel safe doing that, so we also live stream and have committed to continuing to live stream for those folks. But it's starting to rain. I don't know what you know about Washington State and the Pacific Northwest, but we have maybe one more Sunday where we can be outside without it pouring down rain on us. And so we're at this point where we need to set direction on this, right? The other part of this model is managing resistance or sabotage. These are scary words, right? Resistance and sabotage. And so I want to put it in a little bit of context. This is systemic resistance and sabotage, not personal resistance and sabotage. Human systems like stability. They like to stay the same. And so a healthy human system will resist change, will resist the setting of direction. It's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that the choices are bad or the direction is bad. Healthy systems resist change. And that can look different ways in different systems. Right now, every single one of our systems has been forced to go through dramatic change. And so some of us, I've talked to lots and lots of clergy. Some of us, people were very upset in the very beginning, right? There were some clergy that I think experienced, and lay leaders that experienced churches who just were so upset that the church was closed, right? Did anyone have that? You guys, it's kind of interesting. You all were like the worst, right? Like you had such intense COVID experiences. We were the first. So it started out here with us and we didn't know what would happen. And there's a real libertarian Wild West streak out here where we don't like to be told what to do by anyone, especially our government. And so closing was remarkably controversial out here. When we said, pastors who said, we're going to shut down our churches got a huge amount of resistance. Like, how dare you? How dare you do that? Even with all that was going on. That was systemic resistance to unwanted change, right? The thing is, even wanted change, even desired change will have natural resistance in your system, right? So managing resistance or sabotage is an important part. So what I want to do a little bit, I want you to think to yourself for a moment. When you think about staying connected and setting direction, as a leader, which one of these is your favorite? Your go-to? Most of us are better at one of them than the other. Because in differentiation, staying connected, if we overdo it, we enmesh with our system, right? And we're not able to set direction. But that feels really good to some of us. Some of us would like to be a part of our system, enmeshed in it. Others of us don't like to belong to systems and want to be the ones in charge and want to set direction and really are good at that. And that's our favorite thing. So think for a minute about which one of these things is your favorite thing as you lead. Mine is staying connected. I'll just tell you. I love to be connected. I hate to make anyone upset. All my therapy has been around whether or not people like me and how to give that up. But I'm 42, so I've done a bit of therapy. And setting direction. What I found in the pandemic was that I was required to do a bunch of direction setting, a bunch of the thing I didn't like as much, and to do it quickly for the sake of my system. And it was really draining. It was really draining, and it was really anxiety producing for me. Let me see how much. Do you have this picture in your mind? These three things: staying connected, setting direction, managing resistance, and sabotage. So I want to stop sharing and go back to be able to see you.
There is a question posted by Charles.
Yes.
And
how do you? I see that. It's a really good question. How do you distinguish between systemic and personal resistance? Mm-hmm. How do you tell when the system's resisting you and when someone just doesn't like you and wants you out? It is difficult to do that. I will tell you that my assumption as a leader is that it's systemic, always. I start with that assumption because that just helps me be kinder and more compassionate to the person who's resisting me. So when someone, I had a parishioner who was just, this probably hasn't, I'm joking, this has probably happened to all of you, but I had a parishioner who just was completely unhappy with every single thing I did. It didn't matter how nice I was or how well I did it. It didn't matter. She just was always unhappy with me. And I started to wonder, what is the systemic issue? Like, what is she doing? What is she holding for the system? What anxiety is she carrying on behalf of my church? And my congregation, again, this is one way I think our cultures are pretty different from East Coast to West Coast. My congregation has a very indirect way of dealing with conflict. No one in my congregation has ever told me no directly. But they just don't come to stuff if they don't like it. Like, That's how I find out that they don't like my idea. And it took me a while to learn that. I'd be like, we should do this. And they're like, okay. And then they wouldn't come to it. And I'm like, okay, you didn't like it. Okay. How can I figure this out ahead of time? And I realized that she's holding some of that. And so I started to work to put systems in place where people could indirectly express their critiques of what we were doing, where they didn't have to come tell me directly. And she calmed down. She still eventually ended up leaving because I think and that was how I could tell some of it was personal, Charles, is that we worked on the systemic issues, and so that wasn't motivating anymore, and it turned out she just actually didn't like being Episcopalian. And that's okay. We sent her away. We wished her well. We had a goodbye ceremony. I hope she's having a great time being a United Methodist. I think that's where she went. But one of the things as a leader, one of the ways we can be enmeshed is by taking it personally. That being said, there are times where people target you. But again, they're usually oftentimes in a system, especially if you're someone with a collar on or with a title on your name tag, or if you're a matriarch who holds, or a patriarch who holds wisdom from generations in a church, you become a projector screen for people's stuff. Sometimes there's things you need to change as a person, or they just have it out for you. But a lot of times I've found when I am in a leadership role, it's usually not personal. Mostly because they don't know me well enough to be personally upset with me. So I remind them of someone, or they're bringing their family issues, or there's a stressful thing in the system that they're bearing forth. And for me, it's easy to be compassionate about that because it doesn't feel good to be the person the system expects to act out. That's not a happy place for folks. And I've also often found that it's the folks who have, I keep an eye on my mentally ill folks in moments like this, because they also will have a special role in bearing forth for a community, sometimes for a whole society, the things that are anxious and hard. So what I want to do in kind of just the next 15 minutes, and there's 21 of us. So I think, Victor, we should do breakouts, maybe through 3 or 4, maybe three breakout groups. They're going to be random. But what I want you to think about and talk about a little bit, is just your own experience. So I'm going to put it in the chat. There we go. Choose one system in which you're a leader. So for the sake of this exercise, it could be your church. You're all leaders in your church, but it could be something else. It could be a ministry area that you're in charge of. It could be your family, your business. Maybe you're a leader in our nation. In the past few months, what aspects of self-differentiated leadership have you called on the most often? So staying connected, setting direction, managing sabotage and resistance, and which have you found the most challenging since March? Where are you hoping to give more of your attention? So this is about thinking, stepping back a little bit, right? I know everyone here is thinking a lot about the logistics of opening. This is a step back from that, about the dynamics of opening. As a leader, how will you, in your process of doing these decisions, stay connected to your people's feelings and emotional fields? And how will you confidently set direction while knowing that there'll be resistance to it? One more thing before we split up is that working the setting direction and the staying connected, working them well and confidently and intentionally actually does some of the managing of sabotage and resistance work for you. Right? People who feel connected to you as a leader are less likely to try to get you when you set a direction that they don't like. Or if you're setting good direction, that can help people feel safe and connected.